I've just survived the UK's latest heatwave. It reminded me that solar energy is only going to become more reliable, more efficient, and more viable over the coming years. As my first hate comment proved, a weirdly large number of people really oppose renewable energy. And they often do so from a place of ignorance. I cannot really blame them. A lot of money has been spent to ensure we all hear some deeply misleading or outright wrong things about renewable energy. So I'm back with another video on myths about solar energy. Hi, I'm Dr. Eleanor Tufnell, an environmental scientist, and today I'm going to be covering 4 more myths about solar power. My last video on this topic focused on myths about solar's reliability and durability, but this time we're going to explore myths about the placement of solar panels. Right now there's a lot of debate about where we should be putting solar panels, and that debate can get quite heated. So let's cut through the rhetoric and start to focus on the science. Myth 5. Solar is swallowing up valuable farmland and poses a serious threat to agriculture. The myth goes like this. Large swathes of valuable, fertile farmland are being gobbled up by developers and turned into solar farms, thus removing vital farmland indefinitely and jeopardizing the country's food security. But how much farmland is actually being used? How much farmland would hypothetically need to be used to maximize solar power? And how much fertile land is used? Many of the factors that make land suitable for farming also make it ideal for solar power, notably land being flat and sunny. But does this bring solar farms into conflict with our food production needs? First, let's talk about whose land this is and under what terms these solar panels are built. While some land is bought outright, a lot of farmers are leasing out their land for this use. Many farmers' unions, guilds, and bureaus, such as the National Farmers' Union of England and Wales and the American Farm Bureau Federation, actively encourage this as a way for farmers to diversify their income streams, increase land use efficiency, and support local communities by creating jobs and investment opportunities. Farmland is the site of a large percentage of ground-based solar, around 52% of it in fact. But how much land does that actually add up to? And how does that compare to other land uses? So here are some numbers. In the UK, for example, in 2022, the land use for ground-mounted solar power was estimated to be around 230 square kilometres, which is just under 0.1% of the UK land usage. Depending on which source you use, agricultural land covers somewhere between 56 and 70% of the UK, with grazing pasture making up approximately 70,000 square kilometres, while cropland accounts for 67,000 square kilometres. For perspective, in the UK, golf courses take up 1,256 square kilometres, and airports use around 493 square kilometres. In fact, depending on country, golf courses take up vastly more land than solar power. In the UK, golf courses account for 6 times more land use. In the US, it's 4 times, and in Canada, it's 15 times more land used for golf courses compared to solar. I'm picking on golf courses here because they also use land that could be used for farming. They also frequently use a lot of water and are rarely managed in a way that supports biodiversity. If we are concerned about land being removed from agricultural use, we should apply this fairly across the board, not just to solar farms. That's how much land is currently used for solar. But how much could it eventually use? Planned future solar development is estimated to be around 700 square kilometres by 2035, which is just short of 0.3% of the UK's land surface. If we built enough solar to line up with the UK's net zero plans, which we should, that would require at most 0.7% of the total UK land, which is 1% of farmland. Only a minuscule amount of farmland is needed for solar power. But if we're using prime fertile farmland for it, wouldn't that be a waste? Well, yes, it would, which is why most countries have policies which require or strongly encourage solar farms to be built on low-quality marginal farmland and avoid the best and most versatile farmland. Farmers are also incentivized to keep their best land for farming and only lease out marginal land or low-quality land for solar farms, as that will make the best profit. The majority of applications to build solar farms on high-quality farmland are rejected, but some still succeed. Taking any good land away from food production would be a problem for food security, but at present the land used this way is only a tiny fraction of fertile farmland. One excellent way to tackle this issue is agrivoltaics, because we don't actually have to choose between farmland and solar power. We can have both. While crops and animals do need sunlight, there is such a thing as too much of a good thing. Every crop has different levels of light that they will thrive in, and many benefit from some shade. The same is true for livestock. As the planet warms, giving shade to crops and livestock will become increasingly important, so agrivoltaics have become a useful way to offset some of the effects of climate change on agriculture. Other advantages of agrivoltaics include water conservation, increased crop yield, protection from weather, such as hail, high winds, heavy rain, etc., prevents soil erosion, increases revenue and economic stability for farmers, and convenient energy production for the farm and local area. The crops shown to have increased yields with agrivoltaics include basil, broccoli, celery, corn or maize, lettuce, potatoes, spinach, tomato, and wheat. Even pasture grass also seems to benefit. We're still learning about how and to what extent agrivoltaics can improve yields, but one of the factors is that the solar panels create microclimates, which alter things such as relative humidity, air temperature, wind speed and direction, and soil moisture. Combined with the protection from the elements, this seems to be greatly beneficial for crops, which is estimated to have the potential to increase land productivity by between 35 and 73% globally. That wide range tells you that there's still a long way to go in this research, but so far it has been very promising. In the case of livestock grazing under solar panels, this provides a benefit to the panels themselves, as the vegetation beneath them does not need artificial mowing, instead relying on the animals to do it. This prevents the panels from being shaded out and avoids emissions from the mowing machinery. One last thing to consider is that climate change itself will reduce available farmland. In the UK government's Food Security Report of 2021, even under the medium emission scenario, climate change is predicted to reduce the country's high-quality farmland from 38% of total farmland to 11% in 2050. We will lose farmland regardless of what we do, so the choice is between using a small amount of largely low-quality agricultural land for solar power, and potentially using agrivoltaics so we don't lose the land at all, or losing the land to climate change with no benefit. Myth 6. Solar farms and brownfield versus greenfield land. One concern that comes up a lot with proposed developments of solar facilities is that it will be essentially a bait and switch for land use, the fear being that once greenfield land is used for solar farms, it will then be quickly redefined as brownfield, thus opening the door to further development of the site. Quick terminology explanation. The UK uses greenfield and brownfield to describe land that hasn't been developed and land that has been, respectively. Developed here meaning occupied by a permanent structure, so may include former industrial sites that may be contaminated. These sites are generally preferred for housing, as it means not removing greenfield land. Greenbelt is an official designation for areas protected from most forms of development to, among other things, prevent the unrestricted sprawl of urban or industrial areas. Different countries use different terminology, but the general principle is the same. When greenfield sites are built upon, they are reclassified as brownfields. And as brownfield sites, they are generally preferred for housing and industrial development. The greenfield site is lost, which is why people become concerned about solar farms being built on greenfield sites, fearing that once the site has been developed as solar farm, it will never again be a greenfield site. However, there are policies in place to prevent this from happening. Naturally, this varies by country, but in the UK, for example, solar farms are usually only granted temporary planning permission, usually for 30 to 40 years, which is the expected lifespan of the panels. Restoration of the site to its original use is typically a legal condition for gaining that planning permission. So what damage to a site could installing solar panels do? And can this be mitigated? Well, installing solar panels on farmland is often a fairly low-intensity change, and may involve just driving brackets into the ground, or potentially the use of ballasts to avoid penetrating the soil. Research is ongoing on the impact this may have on future agricultural use. For example, the compaction of the soil may have a negative effect on farming, but there is also evidence that situating solar facilities on a site for a period of time may provide excellent opportunities for land restoration. One problem is that we have little direct evidence either way, as solar farms have 30 to 40-year lifespans, and most have only been built in recent years, so we do not have sites to examine how effective decommissioning and land restoration processes are. But if we use examples of other reasonably comparable land uses, such as wind projects and golf courses, these examples show that projects can and do return to their original land use, and the same is likely to be the case for solar farms. A common argument is that solar farms shouldn't be in fields at all, but instead ground-based solar should be placed on the lowest quality or previously developed brownfield sites. This way, the logic suggests, we keep all the good farmland and use up the less useful land. And this isn't inherently wrong, but misses the reasons that this often isn't how things are actually done. These largely come down to the availability of low-quality land, the suitability of the site, competition for other uses such as housing, and the cost of development of a site for solar. It's a deductive argument because we tend to assume that there are lots of brownfield sites that no one wants that would be perfect. In reality, only about 8.7% of land in England is brownfield, while greenfield accounts for 91.1%. Despite being only a small percentage of land, 54% of new homes built in 2021 and 2022 were built on brownfield land. Brownfield sites frequently require processes to remediate environmental issues on the site, which adds time and cost. Due to the nature of many brownfield sites, solar development may require fixed tilt ballasted systems, which are used to avoid penetrating landfill caps and disturbing soil. These systems will require additional labour, concrete, and steel, which increases the costs of the project. Fixed tilt installations also generate around 15% less electricity compared to arrays that can track the sun and move with it. While I won't get into the weeds on this, first time for everything, I know, there is also a debate on how land is categorised, and a revision of land categorisation is urgently needed. In the UK, the land classification system in use originated in the 1960s and was last revised in 1988. The post-1988 dataset only covers about 8% of rural England. All this means that figuring out what classification of land a proposed solar plant will be built on is much more confusing. Brownfield land is comparatively rare, harder to develop, and needed for industrial or housing development over solar. As only a small amount of farming land is needed for solar, and there is a large quantity of low-grade agricultural land that would be suitable. When you add in the possibility of agrivoltaics, farmland becomes an increasingly suitable and viable location for solar power. Myth 7. Rooftop solar is the only way to go. Along with the argument that solar should be confined to brownfield sites rather than greenfield, is the belief that solar panels belong on roofs and not fields. Now, rooftop solar is awesome, but there are some very compelling reasons why rooftops are not the only places we can or should place solar panels. Rooftop solar has a lot of advantages, particularly for home and business owners. It allows some protection from fluctuations in price or availability of energy and reduces reliance on the national grid. If your country offers a feed-in tariff, you may even make money from selling excess energy back to the grid. With the increasingly efficient battery storage options, one can store excess energy and use it when needed, again reducing reliance on the grid. Due to these benefits, rooftop solar may even increase property values and allow both individuals and local communities to contribute in a meaningful way towards net zero and energy sovereignty. However, there is a limit to the available rooftop space for solar panels, and rooftop solar is much more expensive than ground-mounted solar panels. This includes both cost per unit, primarily due to the increased installation costs for rooftop solar, and in terms of cost per watt. Rooftop solar costs close to 3 times as much as utility-scale ground-mounted installations. While solar technology has rapidly dropped in price over the last decades, it may not be an economic choice in all locations, so choosing the most economically viable option is key. Right now, this is ground-mounted solar. The second problem is there simply isn't enough suitable locations for rooftop solar available. In the UK, solar panels on rooftops and car parks could only meet about half the UK's targets for solar by 2035. A study in Nature found that rooftop solar could theoretically supply at most 65% of current global electricity consumption, when paired with load shifting and storage. This means that rooftop solar alone is insufficient to meet our solar energy targets. In short, due to how much solar energy will be needed to meet renewable energy targets, both rooftop and ground-based solar energy will be needed, and both should be encouraged. Myth 8. Solar farms destroy habitat and endanger wildlife. If you're a long-time subscriber, you know how often I've talked about wildlife and advocated for protecting it. So the accusation that solar power endangers wildlife, particularly bats and birds, is one I take very seriously, because there is evidence that these creatures occasionally collide with solar panels. As with all man-made infrastructure, solar panels have the potential to harm wildlife when compared to land left in its natural state. So the question becomes, how common are these deaths? And how does this number compare to other man-made sources of mortality for these creatures? Exact estimates are difficult to come by. Carbon Brief estimated that in the US, a little over 300,000 birds are killed annually by solar panels. That is a lot of birds, and if we viewed this number in isolation, it would be pretty damning. So let's see how it compares to other human infrastructure. It is roughly 50 times smaller than the number of birds that are killed by the fossil fuel industry every year in America, which includes not just deaths from collisions, but also electrocutions, pollution, and climate change. In the US, around 14.5 million birds are killed by fossil fuels every year. That itself is dwarfed by the 215 million birds killed on US roads annually. Deaths from collisions with US windows and buildings generally, 677 million birds a year. Even that pales in comparison to the 2.7 billion birds killed by cats every year in the US alone. Yes, billion with a B. I'm not saying this to dismiss the deaths of birds on solar farms, far from it. In every case, we should be doing what we can to lower those numbers of deaths. But the number of deaths from solar panels are minuscule compared to the impacts of fossil fuels, windows, and cats. Look, I adore cats, but they are nature's perfect fluffy killing machines, and nature pays a steep price for their presence, particularly in areas where cats are not native. But that's a video in its own right, so moving on. So far, there is little evidence that solar development is a greater threat to birds than other comparable infrastructure. And there is even less evidence for other animals, such as bats, being particularly vulnerable to solar panels. There has been speculation about solar panels having a lake effect, whereby the reflective nature of the panels causes confusion in the animals, particularly migratory waterfowl, who might mistake them for bodies of water. A comprehensive literature review found little evidence proving this to be a causal factor in bird deaths in solar installations. Large bird conservation groups, such as the RSPB in the UK, are very much in favour of solar power, and note that as climate change itself is a severe threat to birds and nature, tackling it is vital to protecting them. Solar panels can help with this. Naturally, when considering the installation of solar power facilities, it is important to consider its effect on the local ecosystem and impact on biodiversity and conservation. This can be a real concern. One of the downsides of ground-mounted solar is that it requires more land than many other energy sources per kilowatt-hour of electricity generated. This makes them particularly concerning if built in areas of high biodiversity or where vulnerable species exist. I'm sorry to say that this is not a hypothetical concern. In Spain, a threatened species of bird, the black-bellied sandgrouse, actually became locally extinct due to a solar power plant's poor planning. In the Mojave Desert, iconic species of plant and animal, including some rare cacti and desert tortoises, have been threatened by the development of solar facilities. Rajasthan's state bird, the great Indian bustard, has faced threats to its habitat from solar and wind facilities. So it is vital that proper ecological and environmental impact assessments are carried out on proposed sites, and areas of high ecological value, such as fragile desert ecosystems or the nesting sites of rare birds, should be avoided. That said, installing solar panels can also bring ecological benefits to an area for a number of reasons. They keep land that is considered low value as farmland largely intact, giving farmers an incentive to retain the land rather than selling it off for development. Many modern agricultural practices, such as monoculture and the heavy use of chemical pesticides and fertilizers, are detrimental to biodiversity. So turning over fields to solar, the land is left relatively unmanaged, and this can allow wildlife to flourish. See my last video on solar myths to learn about some little birds who made a solar farm their favourite nesting site. There is a wealth of evidence from the UK alone that shows quite how valuable solar farms can be in providing habitat for nature, particularly birds and pollinators such as bees. Solar farms need not be harmful to the natural world. They can be built on land that has minimal conservation value or has already been developed, and they should be built with conservation and biodiversity in mind. If this is done right, far from harming nature, solar farms can help nature thrive. Conclusion. Now, that was a lot of information I just threw at you, so I don't blame you if you're a tad dazed by now. But I think the important points to take from this are: solar farms are largely built on low-value farmland and only used a tiny fraction of available farmland. Both rooftop and ground-based solar will be crucial to meeting energy targets. Greenfield sites are often more suitable for solar farms than brownfield sites, and robust legal protections should ensure that the sites are restored to their original condition. While deaths of birds are associated with solar installations, the number is minuscule compared to other human impacts on birds such as roads and cats. When sited correctly, avoiding vulnerable habitat, solar farms are not a threat to nature and can actually benefit it. Agrivoltaic practices mean that we do not need to lose farmland to solar panels. Both can coexist and even benefit each other. So I hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the environmental impact of solar panel placement. I hope you learned a lot while watching it. If you enjoyed, please like, comment and subscribe to see more related content. Please do share this video with anyone you think might find it interesting. As always, there is a library of links in the description if you would like to know more about any of these topics or want to check my sources. So until next time, thank you for watching.